Welcome back to today's explainer. Okay, so have you ever woken up after sleeping on your arm wrong and it's just completely dead? Like you touch it and it literally feels like it belongs to someone else? It's so weird. Well, today we're going to explore that visceral, everyday feeling of physical numbness, but we're using it to understand a really profound and honestly often overlooked truth about our own awareness. We're drawing on this fascinating source that argues bodily numbness actually holds the key to understanding how we interact with the invisible world around us. Let's get right into it. So, let's start by looking at a super simple physical reality. The author kicks things off with a totally grounded, universally understood premise. You know, when your back has an intense itch, you need a vigorous scratch, right? A light touch just doesn't cut it. Or if you've got a pounding headache, you need a firm massage. And think about when your hands are absolutely frozen from the biting cold, you could literally stick them in hot water and feel nothing, zero. In extreme cases, like with tissue necrosis or a completely paralyzed limb, a sharp needle prick doesn't even register. The foundational premise here is elegantly simple. The duller a part of your body is, the slower it responds to the outside world. I mean, if a body part is compromised, the information just doesn't get through. But on the flip side, a highly sensitive part of your body, it reacts instantly to the slightest change in temperature or pressure or pain. That's just basic biology. But what's really cool is how the author uses this undeniable physical fact as a launchpad for something way deeper. Which brings us to Section 1, Physical Numbness versus Spiritual Senses. Now, this brilliantly illustrates the author's core analogy. Our physical body, as we all know, reacts to the material world through our 5 standard senses: sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch. Pretty straightforward. But the source introduces this counterpart, the spiritual body. And the idea is that just as our physical body uses those 5 senses to navigate the physical universe, our spiritual body uses something they call spiritual perception to react to and navigate the non-material world. Moving right along to Section 2, the neglected sixth sense. Really think about this for a second. We easily accept that physical eyesight and hearing vary wildly from person to person. I mean, you might need thick glasses, while I might have perfect 20/20 vision. We also accept that these physical senses change and, frankly, degrade as we age. Yet the author points out a pretty fascinating contradiction. When someone suggests that our spiritual perception differs from person to person and actually fades or sharpens in the exact same way, a lot of people immediately scoff at it. It's like we totally accept variance in the physical world, but we demand absolute uniformity in the spiritual one. Makes you wonder, right? So here's the crucial takeaway. The sensitivity of your 5 physical senses dictates the health and survival of your physical body. If you can't feel pain, you might accidentally leave your hand on a hot stove. Well, the text argues that in that exact same way, the sensitivity of our spiritual perception dictates the health of our spiritual body. This means that if parts of your spirit are dull or even necrotic and dead, they feel absolutely nothing of the non-material world. You're just spiritually numb. Let's look at how this plays out in the real world in Section 3, High versus Low Spiritual Perception. The author is very clear that spiritual perception isn't some mystical, glowing aura kind of thing. It's highly practical. Look at this contrast. Someone with high spiritual perception detects future trajectories from really subtle clues. They read between the lines. For instance, when a new government policy drops, they intuitively sense the shift and adjust right away. But someone with low spiritual perception, they remain completely indifferent. You can explain the policy to them until you're blue in the face, but they won't react until it's a concrete reality. They basically wait until disaster strikes to finally wake up. And the source emphasizes that this responsiveness is rooted in intuitively grasping the essence of things. They describe it as a connection that is heart to heart, mind to mind. There's actually a really vivid animal analogy used here. We often say that highly perceptive dogs or horses can sense human intentions promptly, right? They respond to our moods without us saying a single word. Compare that to less perceptive animals, which the author says often only respond when physically forced. It's all about having that capacity to intuit unseen signals. Okay, let's unpack how to fix this numbness in Section 4, Focus as a Magnifying Glass. This analogy is just incredibly striking. According to the text, the primary culprit for a low spiritual perception is a scattered mind. I mean, think of all the notifications and distractions pulling at you right at this very moment. Without intense focus, your energy just dissipates into thin air. But much like a magnifying glass gathering scattered sunlight into one intense beam to ignite a piece of paper, spiritual perception requires you to focus your mental and spiritual energy.
Without that laser-focused point, nothing ignites. You just remain cold and numb. So how do we actually get that focus? That brings us to section 5, cultivating your spiritual depths. The author shares this brilliant, practical example. Once, an American oil exploration company, we'll call them Company A, drilled a bunch of wells in an area but found absolutely nothing. Decades pass, and Company B comes along, sets up in the exact same spot, and bam, they strike oil. Why? Well, Company A just didn't drill deep enough. Company B went deeper. And this beautifully illustrates that our ability to see the deeper essence of things, whether it's striking oil, a diver finding treasure, or, finding your actual purpose in life, it depends entirely on the depth of our cultivation. So what does this word cultivation actually mean in this context? Well, the essence of it lies in refining the heart. The text states that when the heart is made pure and transparent, your perception becomes razor sharp. It allows you to rise above the endless distractions, those worldly illusions that constantly scatter our minds. By refining your heart, you can actually seize the critical moments in your existence and walk the absolute best path, instead of just stumbling around blindly.
And the good news is, sometimes you don't have to walk this path totally alone. The text mentions these individuals known as great hermits. These are people who have cultivated their spiritual perception to an extraordinarily high level. The author actually calls them the finest among humanity. If you're lucky enough to cross paths with one of these rare individuals, the source describes it as being handed a flashlight in a pitch-black room. They help dispel the confusion and illuminate the way forward for those of us whose senses might still be a little dull. Now, just to impartially report the author's ultimate illustration of this concept, they argue that those with the sharpest perception are able to perceive the highest non-material realities. Conversely, people with dull or numb perception are said to be completely unresponsive to the calls of gods, Buddhas, or the greatest creator. Because their spiritual sense is numb, they continually deny the existence of these forces. They might dismiss any calls from the spiritual realm as total nonsense simply because they literally lack the sensory equipment to feel it. The author leaves us with this haunting, really poetic imagery. If you scream at a piece of dead flesh to wake up, it's not going to. The text equates a dull spirit to that dead tissue. No matter how loudly the universe or the spiritual realm calls out to a person with a neglected spiritual sense, they just won't respond. They are spiritually shivering in the biting snow, entirely oblivious to the cold. To wrap up today's explainer, I want you to take all this out of the abstract and really reflect on your own life. Look at the relationships around you. Look at your career, your personal growth. What essential signals, what subtle clues might you be completely missing right now, simply because your mind is scattered and you haven't drilled deep enough? Are you actively anticipating the future, or are you just waiting for a crisis to force you to wake up? Thanks so much for joining us, and keep cultivating that focus.